Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Shuffle. I'm looking forward to the conversation today because I think empathy plays an critically important role in tarot. I think it's kind of at a core of a lot of the practice. There is a certain amount of the practice that happens without empathy. I've done, of course, readings for people I've never met or that weren't with me while I was making the reading for them. And in those cases, the way in which we employ empathy is a little different and a little more nuanced. But a lot of my conversation today is going to talk a little bit more about the direct relationship when you're sitting with someone doing the reading and the empathic experience that occurs during a reading and how that can really add to the reading and how you should work with it. Fascinating conversation, I think. It brings me to one of my favorite criticisms I love criticisms of tarot because I'm just like, yay, secular tarot, let's talk about it. But one of the big ones that comes up all the time is that people are like, it's a cold read, isn't it? You just do a cold read and that's the long and short. And I think that a cold read is very, very important in tarot. I actually really believe that cold reading is a really important skill and that it can add a lot to a tarot card reading. I think that would be kind of foolish to go into a kind of counseling session and not use our cold read of the person that we're discussing this with as part of the information that we use and how we provide more information to them in the reading. It would almost just be like ignoring a lot of what's available to us that would allow us to make a more powerful and kind of product in the end. So I like cold reads. I think I'm pretty good at cold reads. I think that's contributed to my success as a tarot card reader, in addition to the divinatory element and all the practice at just the general techniques that I employ to guide us through readings in general. But man, the cold read for me ties into the conversation about empathy so much. When people bring that up, I'm like, it's really important. I think that empaths make incredible readers. I think that most, kind of spiritual practitioners you'll meet are kind of empaths. At some degree, many of them extremely so. There's just a lot of empaths in the spiritual communities. And there's a good reason why. Let's talk for a moment. I need to define empathy because I just want us to all be on the same page about how we're using that word, and it could be a little loaded. I'm using empathy, meaning literally the kind of experience of feeling something that somebody else is feeling. So when you're sitting with them and I notice someone is feeling happy, the empathic experience is experiencing their happiness. For me, the empathy is talking about really experiencing feelings that are coming from outside of you, that are not your own. Not my reflected happiness, because you being happy made me happy, really the experience of your happiness, just really keyed into your feelings. And I am empathically kind of sharing those feelings. Closely tied to maybe compassion. We could get into semantics about it, but just to be clear, what I'm saying when I say empathy, I really mean the shared experience of emotion and the ability to key into and experience somebody else's emotions. Which is why it's pretty close to the cold read. A lot of that information when we're sitting down together comes through. Now, a lot of times, tarot gets to be thrown under the bus as it's just the cold read. And I know it's not just that, as much as I like to say that cold reading is a very important part of it, and I love utilizing it in my readings. I know that there's more to it because I've done readings, of course, with people that weren't there, or I prepared a reading and delivered it later, written and then passed off. So I know there's more to it, and that comes into come kind of from the divinatory element, but I kind of want to talk about empathy because even when I'm doing sort of the divinatory end of tarot and kind of gleaning those messages from a more spiritual realm, that experience to me is not far removed from empathy. It's really similar or even the same. So there's a way in which we can employ the empathic process even in the absence of the person who's necessarily receiving the reading. So I think it's a great one to talk about and to really understand what the empathic process is when you're doing a reading. And so it starts with kind of setting yourself up to really be open to experiencing what someone else is feeling, to really set yourself aside and your own feelings aside, and to say that you really want to enter somebody else's emotional space. And this, of course, is key because so much of the work that at least I do with tarot is really, really deep emotional work. Really trying to help people, guide them through emotional healing. And to be able to join them in those emotional spaces is so illuminating. If you're really empathically keyed in with someone, you know, you can just say, I feel what you're feeling, and understand from there a lot of what's going on and a lot of what I might want to add or say to guide us through this feeling. So, you know, the empathic experience is paramount, critical for trying to, you know, do this accelerated emotional healing kind of process that takes part in our reading. So, and it's an interesting skill because I was mentioning a moment ago that a lot of members of the spiritual community are empaths. And for a lot of people, it just kind of comes naturally. And neato, that's cool. But it's definitely something that you can develop and practice as well. And it definitely, you know, I was saying a moment ago, it starts with you setting your own feelings aside to make room to experience somebody else's. There is a certain part of the stilling ourselves and clearing our minds and getting into that meditative kind of clear slate kind of space that we try to achieve when we're about to draw a card or setting a question or an intention for a reading is also a precursor to getting yourself into the right place for this empathic experience. So that's, you know, important to do with someone that you're sitting with. And I like to talk a lot about on this stream about doing readings for yourself as well. And the empathic experience is not, you know, outside of turning it inward either. You can kind of imagine yourself offering kind of the way that you would to someone else, offering yourself in this empathic way where you're like, I really want to experience your feelings and understand them. You can take a deep breath, still yourself, clear your mind, and turn that to yourself. And it can really put you in a powerful place to understand your own feelings on a deeper level when you kind of clear the clutter and say, I want to approach myself as a character with a warm, loving embrace who wants to promote kindness and understanding to myself. Can really kind of suddenly situate yourself in a place where you're able to access and connect with some deeper feelings that may have not been accessible to you while you were wading through the thick of our feelings. So much stillness. There's so much stillness that's the precursor to empathy for me. It really is, you know, this, and I keep talking about making space, because the empathic experience to me arises when there is space for those feelings from the outside to come in. And that does require being kind of an open channel for those feelings to come in. So it's very interesting situating yourself in that space. And once you're there, and you're suddenly able to connect in that kind of emotional way with someone that you're giving a reading or yourself, it's amazing how much becomes clear and how powerful your voice can become, because you can speak from a place where you're like inside the same feeling and speak with a gentleness that's, you know, just appropriate for the tender moment that comes intuitively because I was speaking from the same place in my heart as you were when we were navigating that moment. And that's where a lot of the really deep and profound connection can emerge between a tarot reader and the person receiving the reading, because there's this sacred emotional space that we suddenly share. And the tarot reader's role is kind of in guiding the empathic process, in setting up the space where I'm going to still myself and invite your feelings, and set up a space where we engage your feelings. We really bring your questions forward and say, I want you to be in your feelings. I want to set up a space where you're going to really settle into them. Then I'm going to join you there. And then we're going to start working on them. And that whole setup is so important and a huge part of creating the magical healing space of a tarot reading. So there's a certain degree not only to where you open yourself to receive empathy, but also where you invite and guide someone to offer their feelings to you. Because if someone's going to close themselves off, and this is important to know when you're trying to make an empathic connection, if someone is trying to close themselves off and does not want to share their feelings with you, you will not be able to access them. Similarly, and this is a side note for all you empaths out there, many people who have the tendency to just be empathic all the time end up needing to practice the ability to put up that barrier and not have everyone's feelings invade their space all the time, which is a different kind of practice. And so, you know, it is possible to put up those barriers and say, I don't want you in my space. And if you are trying to give a reading to somebody and say, I want to help you through that emotional space, and they're putting up that barrier, you're going to need to address that barrier before you get to work. Because, my whole hour here is about the empathic process is very important for the tarot card reading. So if, we're in a place where we're not ready to connect emotionally, one or both of us, then that needs to be addressed and worked through before we're really diving into the reading, if I want this reading to be really meaningful or really productive. So yeah, there's a bit to do there, because when we're going into the tarot card reading, we are often prompting people to dive into some uncomfortable and vulnerable spaces. So part of creating the empathic connection is about creating those safe spaces and stating very clearly the intention for that space is that it's to benefit them and to be able to have the gentle and the calm aura to put out, so that they can feel the genuine invitation to really settle into that space where they're like, yes, I will invite you for an empathic connection. I will invite you into my feelings. I will let you peek inside my heart with yours. That's really, this is a lot, the conversation about empathy for me is a lot about the precursors of things that need to happen before a reading really takes place. And once you're there, that's enough preamble of setting up the empathic connection. Once you're there, the work that you can do inside there is awesome. I hinted a little bit about the ways that you can speak in the moment. I feel like once you've got an empathic connection going with someone is when you really get into a state of flow. And it's incredible how well you can communicate with each other when you're really keyed into each other's feelings. And you can kind of use the cards to guide you through the thoughts and feelings that you need to help somebody else with their own emotional process. And of course, that's kind of what I'm doing in a reading all the time anyway, is I'm just using the cards to structure a conversation that'll guide us through our thoughts and feelings in a way that leads you with some profound realizations about how to move forward with a problem or a question that you weren't sure about what you were going to do coming into it in the beginning. While we're navigating all that, being empathically keyed in is how we walk together through that conversation, and how I can look at some cards, feed you some ideas that are feeding into your own thoughts in your own head that I'm not aware of, but I can feel how you're navigating them. I say this one little innocuous idea that means less to me than it does to you because you know your whole life story and what's going on, and then I feel how that lands. And I can feel the next emotional space it is moving to. And I know from what I said and what I'm feeling, the kind of thing that needs to be said here to move us to our target goal feeling, wherever we were headed, that we set up before we started drawing cards, because it's very important to have your intention and your goals and what you're trying to achieve set up before the cards are turned face up. I preach this all the time, every week, because that's how you do tarot effectively, and it's so important. Don't rush your readings, everyone. Don't do it. Give yourself time. But it's really neat because that way it's almost, I've had a lot of readings, of course, where, the experience for the person receiving the reading at the end is like, I felt like you were in my mind, the way you could just say the next thing that was coming to my mind. And really the key is just being in their hearts. And all the information you need to really carry through an effective reading is there. And we can reside in that emotional space together and get a lot of work done. There's a lot that we can understand about the various emotional spaces that we navigate that, I'd know, if you're feeling grief over A, B, and C, typically the ways to move through that are these, and we know the stages of grief or whatever, we can bring a lot of intellectual kind of insights into those feelings that we navigate together, and that can complement a lot. And I'm adding a lot of information here to kind of round out the secular tarot approach as well. Because if you have a firm grasp and understanding of how various emotions resolve, are usually conceived, you can add a lot of insight from just feeling, I feel that you're angry. Anger usually resolves to guilt, which, turns into resentment later. And I understand the process of anger. So wherever I can feel that we're at in that cycle now, I can add some perspective because I've got that perspective. I understand the wider perspective of how that feeling operates. And if there's any amount of insight in the reading or the discussion we've had up to this point about how that feeling is rooted in the conversation, you can probably contextualize that. Not a lot of insight there. But all this information comes from that empathic read, that cold read, if you will. It provides a lot of very, very valuable information that can add a lot of depth to a reading. Very, very important dimension of the reading. I've drawn a card here just because I think that drawing cards for random examples is a really fun idea to kind of give us some random prompts. I can set the intention for this a little bit before I dive into it. I want the precise examples that we happen to draw from the deck, because here we are inviting our luck through randomness and the whole spiritual element through the element of randomness that we're employing with tarot. I really want the particular emotions that I choose to describe the navigation through to be of specific importance to those of us listening here today. I really would like for the insights I add on navigating this particular emotional space in the context of learning tarot to also be a little bit of a takeaway, like, wow, maybe that's an emotional space I was trying to navigate and I just got something, you know? You might as well pick some good ones. But from the strictly secular perspective that I love keeping held with us along the way, because I think it's an excellent way to practice tarot, drawing cards as random prompts is an excellent use for the deck, and especially here in the learning kind of area. And that's a card whose intention I don't need to overload and labor on too much. The Fool. Okay, so the Fool often can illustrate a fear of the unknown. A lot of times that's kind of a feeling that's coming up when the Fool appears, because the Fool kind of describes this I'm completely new to this situation kind of scenario. And the fear of the unknown is often the feeling accompanied in the Fool. Interestingly, the Fool, the character himself in the story, does not have a fear of the unknown, hasn't learned it yet. And that's the nature of this character, that they have no fear, and that kind of naivety gives them infinite courage. They have no reason for fear yet, no understanding for a reason for fear. But oftentimes when we encounter the Fool in reading, we are bringing ourselves into the situation with all of our, understandings of life up to this point and a fair amount of the fear of the unknown. And oftentimes the Fool kind of resembles this time to take the leap of faith moment in reading. But that's a fun emotional space to navigate. It's such a fundamental feeling, the fear of the unknown, that we all know so well and all struggle with so often, that it's not one I need to describe at super incredible length. I'm sure that all of you can relate. But navigating that kind of space, often in a reading, in a tarot card reading, when you're facing the fear of the unknown, you're often coming to your reader with this, like, please define the unknown for me so I don't have to be afraid of it anymore. And every now and then in a reading, it can go that direction. But a lot of times, you're navigating the fear of the unknown, and that's the point, is that it's unknown. That's the nature of the situation, and there's no changing that. And this happens often in readings where you reach an impasse where it's like, you want me to tell you something that you don't know that you can't know. And that's kind of the point, is that you don't know. And the reading is more about how do you navigate and manage that feeling, the fear of the unknown, And for me, I like to, whenever I'm reaching challenging or uncomfortable feelings, I like to take a step back and observe them, kind of from the outside. You have a fear of the unknown. Let's just sit with that for a moment and just recognize that. And that's okay. That's where we're at. We're staring down the fear of the unknown. That's fine. Very natural. We all arrive there all the time. There's a handful of things to do here. We want to consider if you're having a fear of the unknown and you're hanging on to it, maybe it's because you do want to take that leap of faith. So you're kind of fixated on the leap of faith, but being fixated on it brings up the fear of the unknown. So I'm stuck in the fear of the unknown because I can't let go of wanting to take the leap. Or sometimes it can be a fear of the unknown that's coming that is just going to come on its own accord that we then have to deal with eventually when it arrives. And it's kind of a question of how do I prepare? And the exact way in which you'd prepare could be different based on the objective, actual, real factors in the circumstance in your life going on around. And then there's the whole conversation about how you navigate your emotional realm and prepare on that front. And those conversations are going to vary, of course, reading to reading and person to person. But I think that if I'm facing a fear of the unknown, that's where I'd begin. I'd say, is there a leap that you want to take? Let's talk about why you want to take it. What's the feeling that's inside you that wants to take the leap that is provoking the feeling of the fear of the unknown? Can we understand that internal dynamic that's happening? Because that will probably give us a better idea of how to navigate this situation and help you understand what you want to do. If you've got one feeling that says, I'm afraid I don't want to do it, and one feeling that says, but I kind of do, let's have that conversation. Let's get those two parts out, on the table, illustrated, investigated, so that you can get to the bottom of it and say for yourself, at the end of it all, when I've really considered all of my feelings, I do or don't want to take the leap. Because when we're fixated on the fear of the unknown, it's kind of this unresolved, anxious state, right? And a lot of times what we're doing in a tarot card reading is we are just bringing forward the unanswerable or unresolved questions and giving them a resolution, just laying everything out in definite terms. You want to take the leap because you think you've got a lot to gain, and you're afraid to do it because you also have a lot to lose. Let's measure what you could gain, measure what you could lose, and then you tell me once you've balanced the scales there. That looked, never mind, we're not going to go there. Once you balance the scales there, you can decide how you want to go forward with that one way or another. And feel good thinking that, I've really honored all of my feelings, heard them all out, and made a choice that paid respect to all of them, and understand also that if I am doing a leap into the unknown, maybe I will feel afraid while I do it. And to understand that I'm honoring my will and my wishes as I make that leap into the unknown, and to understand that when I'm feeling afraid, I am doing what's right for me. And sometimes even just arriving in a place like that in a reading, to acknowledge that I'm afraid and that fear is a part of my process towards the goals that I'm trying to realize, can be so empowering to be like, you know what, I'm afraid, and that's just the signal that I'm on the right track. A lot of times we can just contextualize our feelings in that way. I have all these feelings and they signal so many different things to me, and it's confusing. But ideally, I just come back to my goal is to achieve this. And I can illustrate for you in a reading, well, when you're on your way to achieving that, it's going to feel like this. So if you're feeling the fear of the unknown that we just illustrated is your step between you and your goals, you're on the right track. Take a deep breath and keep going. Is the kind of message that we suddenly know. And that can be such a comforting message to receive while we're sitting with that feeling of the fear of the unknown. And the deep, profound emotional work that comes to the tarot card reading happens because we sat together in that feeling. I really joined you there, felt what it was like, and said, you know what I think? I think that we can investigate that, and I can add some context to it that'll help you feel empowered in that space. Even though it was an uneasy space that brought you to, I need a reading. That's the fear of the unknown in a nutshell. I wanted to go back and talk about fear of preparing for unknown events, which is a little different than what the Fool kind of talks about. The Fool's fear of the unknown is much more about the leap into the unknown. Preparing for unknown future events is a little different than what the Fool covers, but I did want to talk about it because that's often an anxiety producing state, especially if it's like kind of disaster prevention or preparation mindset, like what if things go wrong? And I'm kind of spinning on those anxious dialogues. Those are really nice to bring forward in a tarot card reading. And I really can't stress enough that when we're trying to do this empathic process, there is no question or no feeling that is inappropriate for the table. And in fact, any that is present and coming up is appropriate and should be on the table, because it's so important that we really cover and really address all of the feelings that we're bringing into the situation to feel like we've really done a comprehensive and exhaustive coverage of what's at play here for us. If we leave a loose end, and I'm an anxious person who came to a reading because I was looking for resolution to my anxious thoughts, if I have a loose end and a feeling that wasn't addressed, I'm still going to be left wondering. If I'm really trying to resolve anxiety, I want to fill all those blanks, answer all those questions. So it's really important to say, these are the feelings that are happening. They indicate these things, and we can really investigate that in a reading together. And then even more so, if there are feelings that keep recurring for us, and say, okay, what do I do with this feeling? And the answer to what do I do with this feeling is heavily contingent on What are you trying to achieve? Which is why I always come back to set up your goals, set up your goals, set up your goals and your intention before you flip cards, please, because that's how you get clear direction. Otherwise, it's just kind of nebulous direction. How do I handle with this feeling? To what end? And if you leave that to what end kind of as a blank and then start drawing cards, your answers are as nebulous as your question. And it's usually more confusing than insightful when you start investigating those threads that way. I love giving that 2 cents like 100 times. If you got a nickel for every time I started talking about goal setting and intention setting, well, probably no, I don't know. I didn't have anything ready to follow it up with. I'm sorry. You'd have a couple of dollars probably, because a nickel's not a lot, honestly, if you keep adding them up. Even though I've said it a number of times, just if you actually did the math. Anyway, I wanted to navigate another space of feelings, and I drew a 10 of swords, which is a great one. I really want to share, this is my Lazy Crow Tarot that I showcased last week. I funded a Kickstarter that sent me this deck, and it's so blown out. It's too much light on that card. Anyway, it's this beautiful, minimal kind of illustration, and this 10 of swords looks actually very restful and very peaceful. The 10 of swords typically, the figure that's, in the pool of their own blood, face down on the ground, this illustration of the lowest point you can reach, that feeling of all that could have gone wrong did, the feeling of I have bottomed out and I can't go any lower from here. But I love the restful expression on the character in this card, because it kind of, and I want to riff on the 10 of swords for a moment before I talk about how I'd navigate this space empathically in a reading. One of the things I like about the 10 of swords is there's a silver lining read on it where if you have reached the bottom, there is nowhere to go but up. And there is a certain amount of relief, interestingly enough, relief that exists in the 10 of swords, because it's done. It happened. It's a 10. It's a resolution. Things went wrong and now it's done. And there's a certain amount, like the 9 of swords that's so anxious that precedes it, the worrying about all the things that could go wrong, is this very excited and agitated state. The 10, when it's just gone wrong, is at least it's done. Now we can begin to pick up the pieces. Now I can pick myself up. I'm done. I got stabbed and past it. This person looked so restful, and it brought my mind to that feeling of almost relief. There is a restful state. Restful in a pool of your own blood. Restful state in the 10 of swords. That really is captured here in this illustration of the card to me. I want to talk about navigating this space, and this is a heavy card to draw, which is a good one, because oftentimes you'll have readings that bring up some pretty heavy stuff. And you can join some people in that emotional space where they're like, this is the feeling of I have lost everything. This is my bottomed out. And that's a very tender and vulnerable space to be in. If you've set up your reading properly, where you've made the empathic connection and opened each other to a space where you're willing to navigate to this vulnerable space together, you're already doing an incredible job building an emotional connection with the person you're giving a reading, or you're very in touch with yourself if this is a reading for yourself and you're able to go there. But it's a place of a feeling of failure. Deep, profound feeling of failure. Like everything that you were worried that could go wrong did. A lot of times there's some kind of expansion on this card to say that it's more, these are swords, our mental element. It's not necessarily literal reality has gone wrong, though sometimes it can be. It's often a little more about, do you think this is the worst that could have happened? All of that you valued went terribly, and you may be making it out to be worse than it is. But whatever the case, it is the feeling of that incredible loss of just, I was worried that these things could go wrong, and they did. Now I am just there, crippled by the eventuality that I saw coming and couldn't prevent. That's a tough spot. There's a lot of strength to draw from this 10 of swords moment. that is that you can get up again. There's so much strength that comes out of experiencing what you thought was the worst possible outcome and then still moving forward, being able to get up and move forward again. And that kind of perspective is oftentimes, I think, what I bring into empathically in this space when I'm joining someone in a Ten of Swords, is the feeling of look around yourself and recognize that in spite of it going as poorly as you could have possibly feared, you are still in a position where you're able to get up and keep going again and to start again. And that's a remarkable thing. A lot of times when I'm looking at, these emotional spaces and I'm trying to join people here, I'm trying to make them feel empowered. That's a lot of I'm offering a reading is empowerment in your feelings and empowerment in your choices. I want you to be informed and I want you to feel powerful enough to carry through your informed choices as you've determined them over the course of a reading. So if we're in this emotional space, it's often the recognition that not all is lost. In spite of having arrived at a place where previously you would have assumed had that happened, all would be lost. It's this incredible moment where there's so much power to draw from the fact that you can still go forward. This wasn't the end. It was a certain kind of end. There was a certain resolution of your feelings into this manifest horror. But it's not the completely ultimate end. There's still ways to go forward from here. And to begin looking forward at this point, that's kind of the refreshing moment about the Ten of Swords, is we're past the Nine of Swords worrying about it, and now that I'm not 9 trending 10, I'm 10 trending ace, I can start saying, what's next? What is that ace? What do I do now? What's the new direction I go now that that's happened and that's done? And the Ten of Swords kind of presents a fertile ground for that all of a sudden. In an interesting way. Once you've really gone through and experienced the cataclysmic failure, once you've experienced failure, it really opens up the door for, well, what now? Because a lot of things that you thought were what were really important are now off the table or marred in a way where you're still going, but you've got to reevaluate and choose a new direction. And that's a fun thing to do in a reading together. And you can often kind of poke and prod and find what is that direction that you really want in a reading together. And if we're in this space together, I'm going to be looking for that. I'm going to be looking for recognizing precisely what it is that did go wrong. Since I did talk about how this card is sometimes you can blow it up out of proportion, I'd love to be having a conversation or drawing cards that add clarity to the limit and extent of how much damage has been done. How much damage control actually needs to be done here. What actually is lost. Let's lay out the facts here so that we don't get carried ahead of ourselves and make this feeling of failure into something bigger than it actually is. Let's contain it, root it in reality, and recognize that there's still things to go forward into and get an idea of what those are, Because if you're here and you're picking yourself up again, we can have the conversation about how to pick yourself up, if that's one that you're open to and ready for and feeling you need. And we can talk about the direction that you can go now, if that's also something that you're ready for. And that's so important. I can't illustrate that enough. When we're navigating an empathic space with someone, we can't take them outside of where their feelings are. That wouldn't be setting ourselves open to receive them. So there is this kind of give and take of, I'm going to join you in that feeling, and then I'm going to gently urge you in this direction. I'm going to offer some suggestions, or I'm just going to ask more questions to dig deeper and really get into it to understand what it is that you are feeling and what comes out of that. There's when you're doing the empathic process, there is no denial of anyone's feelings. There is no rejection or avoidance of their feelings. And if they're stuck on, I can't believe I failed, then we need to spend some more time stuck on that feeling because you're still processing it. There's nowhere to move forward until we've processed that together. I just, talked about all the places I might move beyond this to try and move us into a empowered feeling in this space. But these are all things that are on my mind that I'm like, if I see a hook in what you're feeling that can pull us one of these directions, I'll offer the line. Do you want this conversation? Would you like us to investigate that card? And see if that's the direction that we want to go. Whenever I am drawing cards, they are either defined to me and given to me by the person I'm giving a reading because they specifically asked for it, or I have suggested that's a conversation we could have, and I will not flip it or follow it unless you want to. Because it's so important. If you're not bought into the conversation that we're having and bought into the emotional spaces that I'm suggesting we navigate together, we're not going to have that empathic experience because you're not going to be open and accessible to receiving me, and I'm not going to be able to hear you on that emotional level. So a lot of times when I'm doing readings, I do all these very deliberate pauses, checking in if you're ready to receive a card. And that's because, not only because I'm being respectful and, careful about how I do a reading, but also because it sets up the space that we need to be in for the reading to happen. We really need us to both, in the same moment, have our heart and mind set on, let's investigate this feeling in this direction. And then we'll add to the conversation. It'll land in the heart, the cauldron will churn, and we'll see what comes out and work through that. And you keep just adding those little lines and inquiries that dig us a little deeper and burble and change the feelings that are happening until we arrive somewhere we're satisfied with. That's the process of a reading. The nuance of knowing which direction you want to suggest and how you want to handle these various spaces comes with experience. And there are all these cards in the deck, and I could come up with a 10-minute example of how I'd navigate each one of them for all of them. And that's why I've loved practicing tarot, is because you can go so deep and there's so much of life to experience and learn from. And I'm grateful to all the people I've gotten to do readings with who have shared their life's lessons with me, and the emotional spaces I've gotten to walk through with them. I've learned a lot. I want to draw another card, but I do want to drop a line that if you have any questions along the way, drop them on me in the chat. I'm watching. And if you want to call in for a reading, we can do that, of course. Love doing those live video readings. And for those of you that have me in the background setting, I love you. Thank you for tuning in every week. It's wonderful having you here. I drew a 5 of Swords for the next card that I'm going to kind of dive into. This is a fun one. I personally like the 5 of Swords. I think it's come up a couple times on the shuffle for me to admit my not so sheepish admiration of this card in this space. It's not a comfortable card for many. It's often called the Pyrrhic Victory or the Swindler, the getting your way but not the way you wanted, or maybe it was underhanded or manipulative. It often depicts a figure who has kind of robbed or cheated some people out of swords. Is walking away with them. And it's interesting. So this can be an uncomfortable space for a lot of people when they are feeling like I have ill-gotten gains in some way, Of course, I just talked about how I feel very differently in this space. To me, I'm a very emotional person, but I can also be very, very cerebral. So I can operate in this kind of objective mindset where I'm like, if I'm doing what I think is the best for everyone and for me, and it feels a little grimy, I can choke down those feelings and do it. I can tell a white lie. I can tell a half-truth. I could disadvantage one person because it was better for the collective in the end. I'll get philosophical. Let's do it. Get my hands dirty. I'll do the dirty work. And that, is a more comfortable space for me than it might be for other people. My friendly little 5 of Swords. Navigating this emotional space is kind of this uncomfortable state of being like, should I have won here? Should I have what I have right now? Do I deserve what I have? There's a question that often comes up in the 5 of Swords. It leads us into the 6, where we end up doing this self-reflection on learning more about ourselves and our values from our behavior in past situations. But at least when we're in the 5, we are just strictly winning by any means necessary. That is what is happening here. and it can feel cold and ruthless. If I've joined someone in this emotional space, one of two directions I might go. You know, there's the one end where I'm like, is this someone who is being cold and ruthless in a way that may spurn them or others in ways that would go against their goals? Or is this someone who is, you know, too considerate and too careful and too, you know, whatever for their own good, that they're not going to take what's theirs when it's theirs because it feels ill-gotten to them? And that can be a really different kind of conversation. More often than not, it's been the second for me when I'm encountering the Five of Swords in readings. Maybe that's because of my own take on the Five of Swords, or because of how I've continued to interpret it and encountered it in readings with people. But a lot of times I've ended up walking people through like understanding what it was that didn't feel good about them, about how they've made their achievements, and how they can either shoulder that burden or justify it, or better understand, you know, what methods they employed that didn't sit well with them, and how they can forgive themselves for where they've arrived and build a plan for themselves that won't have them leaving themselves uncomfortable again in the future, whether by accepting that they are a valid and necessary method to reach their ends sometimes, or by recognizing that it's not a method they care to employ in the future, and recognizing how they can slip into the pattern or habit of doing it without noticing sometimes. This conversation could go a number of different ways, and that's going to depend largely on what I read on them empathically in the moment in the reading. Because without that empathic element, there would be a lot less information for me to go forward in this conversation. Empathy is very important with tarot. That's why I reserved an hour to talk about it. This is a nuanced and interesting space. I enjoy that I've drawn 2 swords cards when I was like, let's talk about feelings, which is usually a heart suit, right? But, sorry, cups. I'm too used to playing with playing cards. But, you know, swords are our mental element. And it's really interesting talking about the variety of emotions that can accompany the mental spaces depicted in the swords. You know, just right here, I was looking at this Five of Swords and was immediately like, it describes this objective kind of action that can be felt about a variety of ways. So the exact feeling that came forth in this moment could be a number of things. And if you've made an empathic connection with the person you're giving a reading before the card is drawn, and we've suitably set the intention for the card and understand the circumstance that it's applying to, then it'll probably be clear which of these situations is this. Am I telling you to cool it and stop cheating your friends because it's going to spurn you in the end, and you're destroying relationships, and you're not even going to really appreciate what you have in the end because of the way you got it? Or is it more of a conversation of, you got to let yourself have some victories, you've got to take what's yours when you need it and not feel bad about it sometimes because you're holding yourself down and holding yourself back in those moments? Very different kind of conversation. Very different kind of feeling to navigate. To the person who felt bad but was getting what was rightly theirs, there's a lot to investigate about their own self-image or their own morality or philosophy, or, you know, there's a lot there to unpack all of a sudden. And to the other one, there's a lot to consider in terms of risk reward. What are you risking by employing these means? What is it costing you in terms of the damaged relationships, or, you know, the collateral damage along the way, getting your way by whatever means? These are all things to suddenly consider and weigh into. Don't just get caught up in, but I got 5 swords out of it, so I'm good. Like, think about what you've set yourself up for down the line, when suddenly the little underhanded methods you've employed in the 5 are now the secrets you have to keep in the 7, that are now limiting the options available to you in the 8, that are now spelling doom to you in the 9, and you know, it's the cycle of swords. There's lessons there. Anyway, I just want to say again, I like that card. I like that card. I want to do one more of these hypothetical emotional spaces that I might meet someone in a reading, because I think that's about what I have time for the hour I have blocked for myself today. And, you know, if it's my last one, I am going to pause. and give it a little more meaning. This one I'm going to root into an emotional space that I have recently been navigating. I would like, it's always better when there's a personal share. I don't have anyone on screen with me to pry into, so it'll just be me. I'm interested in kind of investigating and really navigating an emotional space that's fresh and current for me so that I can bring forward some present feelings to the stream and do the self-read empathic process in real time. I think that'll be a fun little demonstration. I'm now doing the calm, subtle, clear mind, stillness, ready to receive. What feelings that have been coming up for me recently can I investigate here in the interest of better understanding and resolving my own feelings and demonstrating the empathic process in the tarot reading? I got Justice reversed. What a neat Justice. I'm still in love with the Lazy Crow Tarot. So I'm going to bring this one up to the camera again. We've got Justice here with the classic balanced scale and sword. Justice is a very airy card of the Major Arcana suit. So the sword is always usually present, resembling that kind of objective mental mindset that's captured in this card. The scale, of course, resembling the balancing all perspectives and viewpoints before moving forward. But this Justice is on a tightrope, balancing on one foot. Normally we see the figure like sitting in a chair presiding over the court. This just captures even more of the careful balance to me in its illustration. That is so interesting. And there's a lot to navigate. In Justice, it's all about I'm considering every possible viewpoint and weighing them all out before moving forward. And here's someone who is perched and balanced, trying to look, where do I place my foot next? Before I decide, let me do my airy sword consideration and balance the scales, all well perched on one foot. And then I will make the perfect placement of this next as I come down. I like there's a lot hanging in the balance. Hanging on a rope in the moment that you arrive at Justice. It's not just rote deliberation. There is decision to be made, and it's pending, balancing in the meantime. I'm now going back to relating this to the intention I'd drawn for it, which was to get me in touch with some of my own feelings. There are a lot of ways in which I have been grossly unfair to myself. Is in terms of self-criticism. I know this is not necessarily rocket science or totally novel. We all have our self-critical kind of internal demons, but I have definitely got it good. I'm really judgmental and critical of myself whenever especially when I get creative about the things that I create. This feeling was coming up for me earlier today because every time I get into content creation for tarot, I come into this feeling of nothing I make is good enough, and I overthink and overthink and overthink. And here is a reversed Justice who is stuck and having to consider an infinite variety of viewpoints before taking that first step, but doing it just ad infinitum, never ending. I'm never going to stop trying to balance the scale and stop thinking about it. I'm never going to get to taking that step. I have been holding myself in that kind of space around my creative pursuits when I try to settle into them. And I stop myself before I start. I see that captured really well in a reversed Justice here. The feeling to me is somewhat helpless, but I know that in reality it's not, because it's self-imposed. So there's definitely something I can do to help myself there in terms of letting up on myself. But I know that I am incredibly unfair to myself. The issue of fairness comes to mind when I see Justice, of course. It's an easy literal step, and I know that I have been unfair to myself in terms of my own self-criticism and in terms of judging content that I haven't even created yet and considering it unworthy to even be created and stopping myself there. That has been a very challenging feeling for me to navigate. And in all of these cards that I've drawn, I've always, illustrated the feeling and then talked a little bit about how I might navigate that space with someone in a reading. And that's where it becomes much more nuanced. And for myself in this reading, the first question, of course, that always has to come out is, what are you trying to achieve? And for me, I've been with this self-critical voice for so long. I want to be free of it. I want to stop being unfair to myself. I want to be free to create and to do without having to overthink it. I want to trust myself to produce quality content without needing to overthink it. I want to not make myself sad and angry about the way I think towards myself. I recognize that this has been happening and it feels like a reverse to justice. And I've been very stuck in it. Very stuck in it. Very strong habit. Very strong routine. And it keeps coming up again and again. So now I turn to, as reader, turn to that Adrian, as reader Adrian, and say, okay, wow. There are a couple things I'd put on the table. One is the recognition that this is habitual, you know? So we could approach this conversation in a way of, how do I veer out of the habit when I recognize that the feeling's coming on? You know? And I almost wanted to draw a card to resemble how to relieve myself, because I want to be free of this feeling. It might talk about ways in which I can relieve myself of the feeling. Maybe what I need is an action to take when I notice I'm really doing the habit, and a mindset to employ when I'm stuck in the feeling that'll help me loosen up and move out of it. It's almost as though I've really cast myself a ready, set, go, where my get ready is this is the feeling that you have. My mindset is a mindset that'll help me find relief when I'm in the feeling. When I'm catching myself in that feeling, take a deep breath, pause, embody this mindset. That's the mindset that helps you move out of it as you so desire to. If you really want to let go of and move past this feeling, embody this mindset, and then do this to change the habit. Instead of just being down on yourself and getting frustrated and giving up, do this if you really want to break the habit and spell out a new direction. And me, as receiving the reading, Adrian goes like, yeah, that sounds good. I think that's what I want. I want that ready, set, go, please. Yes. That covers what I was wishing for there. That gives me a pretty clear roadmap. So I will real quick walk through these next two cards. I love Ready, Set, Go. I just have to say that again. This spread layout's so awesome. I find myself gravitating towards it all the time, or accidentally building it when I just try to draw cards to resemble things. And just like, actually, I just laid Ready, Set, Go, so let's just do that. And it's great. What a Swiss Army knife. I can drop this on anything. Okay, get ready. This feeling I know too well. Okay, get set. How to get out of it. I'm ready. Well, I say I'm ready, but then I'm pausing to really make myself ready to be ready to see that any card in the deck, aside from these three that have been drawn already, any card in the deck could be this mindset. That is the way for me to really find relief in this feeling. And I have to be ready to embody any mindset, knowing it's going to further me to my goal. Okay. I'm ready to do what it takes. I got an Ace of Swords, which quite literally is a new frame of mind, a changing of the way of thinking, a kind of a novel mindset. It's a little on the nose, very straightforward. Sometimes we ask simple questions and get simple answers. How do I think differently about this? Well, you think differently about it, okay? You have to think about it like it's new. You got to take a step back and just come up with a new way to rewrite the dialogue. Literally just say or do anything different. These swords are about action, about taking direct action. Put yourself in the mindset where you're ready to do something different. Try something new. Try a different direction. Get in the mindset where you're ready to try something radically different than what you're used to. And actually, as I say that, it lands in my heart in a really, that peculiarly magical way that happens in tarot card readings, where I'm just like, you know what, that actually, I can do that. I can do that, and it makes me feel strong in the face of a feeling that has been so paralytic, so all-consuming, so heavy. I can do that when I'm there feeling overly critical of myself, getting angry, getting depressed, feeling resigned. Stop. Get ready to think about it differently and do something very, very different than you normally do. We're going to let go of the old dialogue, the old monologue, and then go. We're gonna Queen of Pentacles the shiitake mushrooms out of this. Love the Queen of Pentacles. The Queen of of course, I get my comfort element. Pentacles showed up for me. Thanks for that. Thanks for that tarot deck. The Queen of Pentacles, of course, is this very calm and patient and enduring character who is calm and rational and patient, can take a step back and be like, well, what's actually at play here and what actually needs to be done? And nothing more. I just want to stare at the facts, not what I'm thinking about, not trying to put value judgments on anything. I just want to recognize what's actually there and patiently and calmly list my itinerary of what needs to be done. And work on it calmly, practically, and rationally. Just, there's a lot of detachment from feeling here. I got no cups. How do I deal with my feelings? Not with cups. Not for you, Adrian. Not today. No, no, no. You get in your feelings and you say, okay, mind needs to be in new gear. And then, when mind is in new gear, you just get really serious in Queen of Pentacles-y, and you look at things for precisely what they are, and lay out precisely only what needs to be done. And don't make it more complicated than that. Keep it simple. You don't need to get deep into your feelings about it. You don't need to come up with some novel way of thinking about it. You just need to not make it more than or anything that it isn't. Not make it more than it is or make it into anything it isn't. Queen of Pentacles, super grounded. And it is the Queen. She's quite knowledgeable. You know, she really does have a comprehensive and fair understanding of everything before her. There's not mystery or new things to learn. The Queen of Pentacles understands the workings of everything here. So there's almost this message to me that, yes, you understand well enough what's going on and what needs to be done. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel or figure it out or anything. You just need to calm down and understand that you do understand it all and not make it more complicated. It's a very long-winded way of saying don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Be ready to embody a new mindset. Be practical and grounded and objective. And stay there. The Queen of Pentacles isn't going to spin off into some philosophical tangent of swords, or some, there's got to be a way of thinking about it. That's the effective one for me, as I was kind of wishing for in the mindset. No, it's just, it is. It is what it is, and it's fine. It's fine. Stop thinking about it. Now it's fine. You're welcome. And funnily enough, that message to me is so refreshing. All right. I got some medicine today. That's good. That's good. I needed that one.